Hi, I'm gonna tie for you a parachute pattern, quill bodied parachute mayfly. This one's gonna be in a frying pan PMD color. Using a quill body, here are the materials. The quill I'm using is D's Flies. These are like a dyed rooster quill. Zelon is going to be my post material. For the tailing fibers, chip brush, nylon chip brush fibers, which are identical to your microfibets that you would buy in a fly shop, except for at a much cheaper cost. All right, so let's get started here. So I got a TMC 100 size 18 hook in the vise. You can tie these up to 16 and down to a size 20, 22. Start my thread, brought it back to the 50% mark, and now I'm at the 75%, 80% mark. I'm going to take my tag end of this thread. I'm sticking it in a material clip because I'm going to use this later to split the tails here. All right, now I'm going to tie my tailing fiber. So I'm going to select three PMDs. The mayfly has three tails, the PMD mayfly. If you're tying blue wing olive, you'd use two tails. Green drake, I don't know. Usually it's either two or three. Really, the fish probably don't care. But if you're going for your own sense of what might be an extremely accurate representation, use three for a PMD. And so I'm roughly aligning these and then measuring. This is going to be about a shank's length. And I'm going to start on the near side of the hook with a loose wrap. And then I'm bringing these up to the top of the hook shank using the thread torque. It's important to keep these on top of your hook shank because otherwise it's going to make them harder to split and line up evenly. And I brought it back just to where the bend starts so that the fibers point down. You can see them right here pointing down. Now I'm ready for my thread that I put aside. I'm going to put it through the hook point. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm skipping a step here. So before I do that, I'm just going to come behind these, lift the tails up. I'm coming behind with my thread and then a wrap in front. That props them up and then that makes them easier to separate. And then basically what I'm doing is aligning them the way I want. So now that I have my tails split and separate, I'm gonna put this thread in here to help lock them into place. And I'm going between the center fibet and on the inside of both of the outer tail fibers. So just like so. And then lock that in place. And if you're, tying a blue wing olive or something with two tails, just do the same thing I'm doing right between the two tailing fibers. I pulled that a little too hard. You don't want to pull on this too hard because then you'll pull your tailing fibers too far forward. But and then I'm gonna wrap right back up the hook shank and back up to the 75% point. So for those of you who are somewhat new to fly tying, one thing that's really helped me with, especially with like quill bodied flies, is just keeping your thread wraps organized. So you know, if I go down the shank and then I'm tying a material, I go back up the shank. And that way I'm just continuing some uniformity to the body here. Because any sort of high spots or whatever are going to transmit to that quill. So now I'm building a slight taper here in the front of the fly. So I'm going back to about 50% and then going back up to the 80% mark. And that should be enough. So the quills that I use, well, these, yeah, if you're using rooster quills, they are naturally tapered, so they're going to widen it out as they approach the thorax. These quills need to be soaked, so I'm pulling one out of some water I have on the side of my bench, and this is nice and wet now, and taking the thin end and tying it in right, you know, at the base of the tail assembly. I'll take a wrap back and then start forward. Again, I'm tying the material in towards the front of the fly so that I keep everything nice and even. Now I'm just gonna clip the excess off and start wrapping my quill, and I want to try to get these turns as close to touching as you can. I'm using a light colored thread so that if there's some space, what shows through isn't going to conflict too wildly with the color of the quill. So I'm just making sure that I'm going to get things started right so that it'll continue the way I want it. And once you get past the hook point, this gets definitely much easier. So you see, it's kind of, if you made a copper john before or something like that, this is basically the same technique. I'm basically angling the quill so it's touching the wrap before it, or that's the idea. Again, you know, a little bit of space is not gonna be too detrimental to the look of this fly. You just don't want huge gaps or inconsistent wraps. So now I'm gonna trim this off, and I'm gonna build up a little bit of thread from where the quill ends, and the bare hook shank begins, so that it'll make completing the fly and attaching the wing assembly easier. Now I'm going to whip finish this. I'm going to use Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails top coat for my as a varnish. This I found this is preferable to UV cures because it dries much harder and is more durable. It's also a lot cheaper. The one disadvantage to it is that there's a little bit of drying time, but it's really not that much. It's like a minute or so. So I have a second abdomen down here prepped, and what I do when I'm tying a bunch of these is tie a bunch of abdomens and then come back and put the wing assemblies on later. You can do any number of styles on this fly, obviously. I'm going to do a parachute, but you can... I've made flag done styles or Quigley styles on these, and I've done CDC compare-dones on these as well. So it's, you know, it's just a good mayfly template, this body. So I have a piece of Zelon. It's cut, you know, I don't know, 1.5, 2 hook shanks. I pre-cut it so that it's easier to attach. I don't want it to be super long, but I also want it to be long enough so I can kind of manipulate it when I start to post it. So I'm wrapping my same tying thread back in. Sometimes I'll switch threads, like on a 20 I'll go to a Vivus, 12 16-aught thread, but with an 18 the Danville seems to be fine. So what I do here is I fold the material over. So basically, if you've ever tied a rusty spinner, it's kind of a similar technique when you start these. So it's going to be like an X wrap, like you're tying in spinner wings. Another important thing when you're making parachutes is to get those initial wraps as tight as you can. And then I'm just going to gather these. Again, trying to keep the first couple of wraps tight. Basically, you want it so that, you know, your parachute post isn't going to flip-flop around while you're attaching your hackle to it. And that's about where I want it right there. Now I'm going to use a whiting. This is from light ginger half cape. I find that high quality hackle, I mean, this is kind of a given. It's a lot easier to work with. And the cost, the financial outlay for good hackle is higher than if you're going to use cheap hackle. But the thing is that you get more flies per feather with like a high quality hackle. So it kind of all comes out. And the advantage to using whiting stuff is that it's easier to use. So I'm prepping this feather. Basically, I'm going to cut a triangle at the base, so it's like a tie-in anchor. I'll show you. Let's see if I can get this up to the lens here. There's a little triangle in the bottom, and then I'm stripping some fibers away from the sides and exposing some stem there. And I'm going to post this with the shiny side facing me. So it's like the concave side is facing the post, and the convex side is facing me. And that way, when you wrap it, your convex side is facing down, your concave side's facing up. So basically what you're trying to do is avoiding having the hackle pointing downwards, which would make it easier for it to get trapped. Also, it makes the fly ride in the water weird if you have hackles below the thorax. You know, it's the parachute sort of, you want it to be flat. This is giving me a little bit of a hard time here. So you see the angle of my bobbin here, it's like straight up and down. This is what I'm trying to get here. And I'm posting everything together here. Hackle into the wing. Sometimes a little tricky to get it started, but once it starts going, it's better. Also another trick people use, and I use often, is adding a little bit of Zap-A-Gap to the post, especially if you're going down to size 20s and lower. A little bit of glue into the post helps stabilize it, and you kind of twist everything together to work the glue in. Tim Flagler has a really good tutorial on that. So that's it. And I'm going to bring my thread forward to right behind the eye. I'm going to add some dubbing here. This is polypropylene dubbing, like Superfine or Orbis, whatever. I just have all my polypropylene in a dispenser. This is a pale morning dun color. Really, you could use these frying pan PMDs for lighter color rusty spinners too, because it's almost a, it's like a reddish pink. So, I mean, sometimes I just think the trout take, they're not, if there's a predominance of flies on the water and something looks kind of like it, they're going to eat it. But I've used, especially with spinner falls, profile is really what's important. Spent wing and all that. So, as you see, I'm just kind of, I wrap back to the thorax and then kind of to where I'm going to build up a little bit of a thorax there, and then back and forth. And I'm doing my best to start this hackle. See, now it's started the way I want it. Want to make sure that the concave side is facing the sky there, so that the fibers are pointing slightly upwards or directly parallel. And that's probably enough. I sized this to an 18. It's not the end of the world if you go like 17 and a half or 17 or 16 with a parachute pattern. You don't have to size to the fly, but if you find that it's around the same as the hook size, use plenty of wraps so that the fly will float well. Then I cut the post. It's about a hook shank. It would touch the end of the body if I leaned it back, and that's it. That's your finished. I got to do a whip finish. Forgot about that. Okay, so the last step is to whip finish, and I whip finish right to the post. So, and I'm using a saltwater or an oversized whip finisher for these parachute flies. So I got a little extra thread in there. So whip finish right to the post. And there we go. And as you can see, I trapped a couple of hackles, which is not the end of the world. Basically, you want to check, you do, for a trapped hackle. So I got a couple. I'm just going to reach in here with the tips of my scissors and trim them off. And I just want to make sure there's nothing that's going to, kind of tip the fly when it's riding in the water. So it just rides flush the film, with the abdomen slightly sunk. That's why these parachute patterns, I think, are so effective. They ride low, as low or lower than a comparadun would ride. And you can also see them really well with that post. Some people put a yellow post, or some people will color the tip of the post a contrasting color, so if there's a lot of glare, you'll see the dark part of the post. But anyway, there it is. There's your finished fly. Hope you get something out of this.